Welcome to another edition of The Fan Perspective. I am your host, Nathan Lyle. It is Monday, so that means another installment of NBA Weekly. Last week we did the Western Conference. This week we're going to look at the Eastern Conference from the 2012 season. Following the lockout, the Eastern Conference was, pretty much locked up from day one. The Chicago Bulls and Miami Heat were the two most dominant teams in the league. For the Heat, you had the dynamic duo of LeBron James and Dwane Wade pretty much on a nightly basis dominating. And now throughout the seasons there were injuries. There were times when LeBron would miss, there were times when Wade would miss, there were times when Bosh would miss. But it seems like if you had just one of those three guys playing, they were still the most dangerous team in the league. They were very hard to contend with. And when all three of them were healthy, they were close to unstoppable. Still finished second place behind the Bulls, who were without Derick Rose for the majority of the season. He was dealing with multiple injuries throughout the year, barely played at all, which, when a team is playing without a guy that was named in league MVP last year, you kind of expect them to fall off, but it seems like they played even better. They stepped up, they played strong defense all season long. They were constantly crashing the boards, dominating the paint. Not to mention a few other key players like Luol Deng stepping up and being the leading scorer on so many occasions, hitting so many three-pointers. And this team looked like they would end up winning the championship, especially if Derick Rose got healthy by playoff time. And then you have the Indiana Pacers, who surprisingly finished with the third seed. And they've got a lot of young, talented players like, they've got Paul George. I'm sorry. They've got Paul George, Danny Granger, George Hill, who they picked up from the Spurs in a trade during the offseason. They gave away the draft rights to Kawhi Leonard to get him. He started on the bench but would end up taking over as the starting point guard more than halfway through the year. And they have a lot of talented young players on that team, not to mention a veteran power leader with David West at power forward coming over from New Orleans. And they played pretty good all-around basketball all season long, and they kind of snuck their way into third place. Most people weren't really paying a lot of attention to them throughout the season. And I mean, I didn't even know that George had went to that team. I just knew he wasn't with us anymore. And then suddenly, playoff time, and they're the third seed. How did that happen? And the fourth seed, the Boston Celtics actually finished with the fourth seed, but they didn't start out that well. When they first began, they had a kind of rocky start to the season. A lot of people were questioning if this was the end of the Big Four era, which it is now officially with Ray Allen leaving during the offseason. But even before then, people were saying, okay, this team's too old, they don't have what it takes, and blah, blah, blah. And the truth is, they looked like a very old team. 4 out of 5 starters over the age of 30. It's hard to believe that they were going to make the playoffs, much less even compete for a championship. But then after the All-Star break, they started getting healthier again. They stepped up, started playing great defense, and they were holding teams to just very low numbers. And that's how they were able to start out scoring to people, because they just couldn't seem to find their rhythm on offense, so they started shutting people down on defense. And then you have the Atlanta Hawks, who Al Horford went out with a bad injury and he missed once playoffs came around. But during the regular season, they had a good combination of players, and they did so much throughout the year. They shocked a lot of people with some of their wins. Once again, one of those under-the-radar teams that most people really didn't pay much attention to, despite the good football they played. The Orlando Magic finished with the 6th seed. Dwight Howard, he started off the season well enough, but a back injury ended it halfway through the year, and the Magic kind of started falling off after that, which, no shock. And then you have the New York Knicks, who only finished with the 7th seed, but they had one of the biggest stories of the season with Linsanity, Jeremy Lin, a second-year point guard. He became a starter, and he was averaging like 30 points and 10 assists a game over and during that and he led the New York to like a 7-game winning streak. And this was all happening while Carmelo Anthony and Amari Stoudemire were out with injuries. And then unfortunately he had a season-ending injury and would not come back. New York, they had their struggles during the second half of the year, but were able to finish with that 7th seed. And the 8th seed was the Philadelphia 76ers, who actually at one point in the season were the 3rd seed. And many people were talking about how Thibodeau winning Coach of the Year. But, in the second half of the season, in a reverse of what the Celtics, they just completely fell off and they dropped all the way down to 8th seed. And at one point in the time, were even out of the playoffs. The Milwaukee Bucks, whose season really started taking off, especially when they traded to get Monte Ellis from the Golden State Warriors. They made a play at it, were almost able to get in. But, just at the tail end of the season, especially in the head-to-head matchups, the Sixers were barely able to break away and cement their place. And I'm sorry for my voice just isn't working right now. I haven't been myself lately, but next week we're going to do a full playoff run-through. I'm just going to explain to you some of the biggest storylines from every single round of the playoffs. After that, we'll do free agency, the big moves that happened during the offseason. And then when we finally get to episode 5 of NBA Weekly, we'll be talking about the regular season. What we might expect from some of these teams, things like that. And tune in tomorrow for NFL news, a look back on the biggest storylines from Week 6, injuries and updates, and of course fantasy stats. This has been The Fan's Perspective. I'm your host, Nathan Lyle. Enjoy Monday Night Football.